Hey guys, and welcome to another recent reading video, something I haven't done in quite a while, and that's because I actually haven't been doing as much reading as I used to do. For me, reading kind of comes and goes, and I had gotten bogged down on a particular book that I was reading that about halfway through I discovered it was missing about 25 or 30 pages. And I don't know if I told this story on a previous video of any kind, but it was a Stephen King book. It's mostly what I read when I do jump into books. And I decided that I didn't really want to read anything else until I could finish that off. But then I decided to go ahead. And I think it was this book, which is Stephen King's Song of Susannah. It's book 6 of the Dark Tower series. I've done a few videos on previous books from this series. I actually happen to have book 5, the Wolves of Akala, over here to the side. But anyway, despite all that, I managed to jump back into this book. But then I was part of the way through this book, and then I took another bit of a reading break for several months before I recently started to read it again. You know, this being this summer, not having as much time to myself on my days off, and still spending a lot of time watching YouTube when I am here alone, reading had just kind of gotten overlooked a little bit. But I decided that I would take some time to finish this book off. Now I'm a little disappointed that I don't have the next book in the series to jump straight into now that I've finished this one. But anyway, I just wanted to give my thoughts on this book as short and as sweet as I possibly can, especially since I had, like I said, a bit of a break in the middle of this book, so I'm not as sharp on the points of the book in the earlier parts. The first thing I want to say, though, is that so far in the Dark Tower series, this has probably been my least favorite book. It mostly takes place in well, I believe quite a bit of this takes place in the quote-unquote modern time, or at least the setting, the time setting in this book. I was looking at it on Wikipedia. I believe this book was put out in like 2004. So roughly, they talk a lot about 1999 in the book. So late 90s, early to mid 2000s is when this is supposed to be taking place. And it spends a lot of time in that period of time in New York and the Northeast and whatnot. And if there's one thing that I've discovered about this series, is that I really enjoy when it takes place in Roland's world, Gilead, or whatever you would want to call it. I think that's where he's from. That's not necessarily what his world is called. But that Western slash fantasy style slash almost sci-fi-ish world that he comes from and that he knows is my favorite setting of these books. So that this took place a whole lot in their modern Earth time frame was a little bit disappointing. That there was such an intense focus on Susannah and, you know, the character of Susannah in this book, and her struggle with this lady named Mia, who's kind of partially inhabiting her body or her soul or whatever, and is going to have a baby, and that baby that was conceived, this weird baby that is Roland and Susannah's, and was conceived because of them having to fuck a demon out of her body or some weird shit that took place in one of the earlier books, and was probably my least favorite moment in the entire series. Just seemed really ham-fisted in. But you know, this is what we have to deal with now in these later books. And also the fact that Stephen King himself wrote himself into his book series here. While I do admit it was kind of clever, I also thought it was a little weird and maybe just a little, I don't know, like he was feeling a little self-important, maybe? I don't know. I'm not a book critic. I just I thought it was a strange thing, and while, like I said, I acknowledge that it was cleverly done, I'm not really sure why it was necessary to put him into the story in this series of books that took, from the first book to the 8th book, 30 years to completely release. I don't know why he felt it necessary to throw himself into it, but anyway, I mean, those were some of the negatives, some of the things I didn't like about it. It's still a Dark Tower series book. It still has all the key players, Roland and Eddie and Susannah, Jake, some of the newer characters that have been added more recently, like Per Callahan. I believe he's the character that came from Salem's Lot. That was cool. I like when the characters in Stephen King's sort of like shared universe appear in other books. Randall Flagg is in this series, and a character from Salem's Lot is in this series. I really enjoyed the way he did that. Like I said, that just him adding himself into it was really strange. But as I was going to say, this movie just really, in my opinion, it moved really slowly, and it spent such a heavy amount of time dealing with the baby and Mia and Susannah and all that, and instead of like really letting us live in Roland's world like Wolves of the Calla did, and of course the I can't remember off the top of my head the book before. Let's see. Wizard and Glass. Yeah, I believe Wizard and Glass is the book that was almost a complete and total flashback to Roland's earlier years. That one was my favorite of the series by far. And I think the series built up from the first book to Wizard and Glass. It plateaued there for me. Wolves of the Calla was just a dip below. This was quite a bit of a dip down. Now this is book 6. Book 7 is The Dark Tower, and it is the end of the series, but there was an 8th book put out in 2012 called The Wind Through the Keyhole, and I guess it's sort of stories about Roland and stories from this universe, but it's not necessarily, I guess, a continuation of the story, but I'm still going to get it. And if Stephen King churns out anything else Dark Tower related, I'll have to check it out. And of course there's the movie that should be out next year, which I'm not going to get into too much right now. It's a little bit of controversy over casting choices, but I think I'd rather talk more about that when it's either closer to being out or after I've seen it. But overall, this book, just like I said, it dwelled too much on this one little aspect of the story, which I'm sure is going to be important to the resolution of it all. But I wish it wouldn't have just spent so much time in this one little area, in this one little thing, 500-page book that kind of just dealt with one thing. And that is... it's a bit of a letdown for me. I don't know. That's all I could really say about it. Still enjoyed this book and still loving the series, but Song of Susannah to me is probably the weak link so far in this one. So I guess we'll have to see how book 7 goes, and who knows when that'll be, a month or two from now or a year or two from now. But whenever I do read it or any other book, I'll do another recent reading video. And anyway, thanks for watching, and we'll see you whenever that next video comes along.